So we know war is very expensive. You have to buy weapons, you have to pay the troops, and you need to buy lots of fuel for your aircraft carriers. And this is bad when you're neck deep in debt. Deficit spending have consequences, especially when interest rates are going up. But guess what? The US doesn't care and war spending is heading higher and higher. And I have a few breaking updates for you. And it is an emergency warning that more money will be borrowed. The bond markets could be collapsing even further. Deficit spending isn't going to end. And in our lead story today, US House Republicans Israel's only aid bill opposed in the Senate. It signals the US government's plan to fund both Israel and Ukraine together. President Biden might be getting his $100 billion request after all. And here's how crazy things have become. The Republicans' plan to only provide $14.3 billion to Israel without giving Ukraine anything. In response, Joe Biden has threatened to veto the bill if it were to pass. In addition to this, Blinken and Lloyd Austin, they have insisted that Ukraine still needs US funding to fight against the Russians. So there'll be more borrowing and deficit spending will continue to head up and up. But why is the US so eager to keep war spending up? We know it eventually leads to bankruptcy, but we are forgetting one thing. In the short term, war spending stimulates the economy. Yes, it is unproductive, but guess what? It sure looks good on the GDP numbers. The slowing US economy is being propped up by Ukraine driven defense spending. And it's so crazy that in Q1 this year, defense accounted for 1/5 of US GDP growth. That's 20%, guys. That's ridiculous. So, if that's the case, why stop at one war when you can have two? You'll boost your GDP numbers even more. Remember the mainstream narrative: when GDP numbers go up, the economy is booming and everyone's richer. And according to the BEA, national defense expenditures were up 4.9% in the year through September after adjusting for inflation. In addition, the Israel war may provide further growth for the American war machine. We can see US defense spending has risen the fastest since 2019. The wars are helping to boost the US economy even though interest rates are still very high. So just imagine if President Biden gets his additional $100 billion. We could see this number jump to 6% or even 7%. And if that happens, GDP for the next few quarters could be 5% or even higher. Now, whether that is genuine growth or not, I'll let you decide. But this is a big reason why America has managed to dodge a recession so far: defense spending. And because Biden's re election is coming in November 2024, we could likely see this rate of spending continue for the next 12 months. If the wars continue and more money is borrowed, he could actually keep the US economy on life support for much longer than we all think. And this is where things get serious. Israel is digging in for a long war. Fighting in Gaza is intensifying as we speak. Netanyahu declares that it's time for war. He's denouncing any call for a ceasefire, and according to him, any pause in hostilities would just give Hamas time to regroup. So this is officially now a long war and the fighting won't stop until Israel decides that enough is enough. How about the United States? Will they take the lead to call for peace? And this is where we need to read between the lines because America just gave us a hint on their end goal. We know America does not back a ceasefire at this time. They have struck down calls for ceasefire from Brazil and Russia. And when the UN called for a humanitarian truce, the US also voted against it. And here's their end game. The biggest clue we have comes from Anthony Blinken himself. In a report by Reuters, Blinken says US and others are exploring options for the future of Gaza after Hamas. And this sounds like just another statement, right? But once we dig under the surface, we will uncover the grand plan. They are already discussing the future of the Gaza Strip. During a Senate hearing, Blinken told the committee that Hamas being in charge of Gaza could not continue. However, Israel does not want to run the strip either. And this tells us that the US wants Hamas out of Gaza, so the fighting will likely continue for weeks, months, or even years until the objective is reached. Blinken then goes on to add that an effective and revitalized Palestinian Authority should have governance over Gaza. And if that can't work, the future may involve international agencies to provide security and governance. This could involve a multinational force made up of American, British, and French troops. So there could be a peacekeeping or occupational force present until a new government is set up, and that could take years or even longer. Now, this will likely be done with the oversight of the US providing funds and security for the region, and this is going to cause a bomb, and we have an idea of how much the bill could actually be. In a study by Brown University, They calculated the costs and obligations of America waging their wars between 2002 and 2020, and the total amount was $6.4 trillion, which is insane. In 2020, America spent around $30 billion to maintain their presence and control in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, and Syria. The US already gives Israel well over $3 billion in foreign aid a year as well. So just imagine how much more money has to be poured to build bases in Gaza to keep control there. It might be 5 billion more a year, or maybe 10 billion, or maybe 20 billion. No one really knows. And this is just the maintenance amount. If the war escalates, then spending could spike to 50 billion or even 100 billion dollars a year. And if this is the end goal of the US and Israel, we are going to see more money be poured into an endless pit. The final bill will well be over just $14.3 billion. But what if the Middle East erupts even further? Well, we don't need to wonder anymore because the Houthis have declared war on Israel. They're already lobbing missiles and things are escalating out of control. The Houthis are part of an Iranian-backed axis of resistance and they have begun attacking Israel. Their spokesperson has come out saying that they will continue launching attacks until Israel stops the hostilities. Now you might be thinking that this is nothing, right? This is a non-event and the Houthis are not a credible threat for now, and you might be right. But this draws Iran closer and closer towards the conflict. The problem with the Houthis getting involved isn't just the threat of them hitting US bases, right? If they do hit American facilities, the US will likely retaliate the same way they struck the bases in Syria. However, there's an even bigger issue. This is the map of Yemen, and the Houthi controlled areas are in red. The whole country is locked in a civil war, so these strikes came from the Iranian-backed Houthis. Take a look at which country is directly above Yemen. It's Saudi Arabia, the most important oil producer in the Middle East and arguably the entire world. And to target Israel, the Houthis will be firing over Saudi Arabia to hit their targets in the north. What if some of them hit the oil fields or the refineries in the kingdom? Will this be enough to force the US to act to defend Saudi Arabia? Any move against Yemen could drag Iran into the fray, which will be a bigger disaster. Then we'll really be on the brink of a big regional war with multiple fronts. That's why Saudi Arabia has warned America that Israel's invasion could be catastrophic. They know that this might very well destroy any stability left in the Middle East. The Saudis have already taken casualties and have taken down a missile headed to Israel from the Houthis, so the regional conflict might have already started. Will Lebanon somehow get dragged into the mess? Will Hezbollah get involved? Because if they do, then America would most definitely intervene. And if things can't get any worse, I have another urgent update for you. Netanyahu has come out saying that we are in a difficult war. This will be a long war. So if you're hoping for things to just blow over next week or next month, this won't happen. The message from Israel is clear. A ceasefire is as good as surrendering to Hamas. It is now time for war and the ground offensive is not going to stop. And this means more money is needed from the United States. It's not going to just stop at 14 billion. America will have to keep funding Israel and the bill is just going to grow and grow. It's just going to snowball even further. But speaking of borrowing money for war spending, the US government is about to break all records again. The bond market collapse we witnessed over the past few months is just going to get worse. The US Treasury has announced how much more money they are going to borrow. For the January to March quarter of 2024, Janet Yellen is going to borrow $816 billion. That's $40 billion more than what they borrowed in the previous quarter. The US has a spending addiction which is only going to grow. Just imagine Biden getting his funding request for Ukraine and Israel approved. This will snowball the national debt to unthinkable levels. Remember what this means, right? To borrow more money, the Treasury issues more bonds to the market. And because everyone knows that war spending is not going to end, which means more borrowing is going to head up, they are all demanding a higher yield. And we can see the public is holding around $26.6 trillion of US bonds. Those includes the Federal Reserve, foreign buyers, private investors, and banks. By the end of Q1 2024, Yellen has to sell an additional $1 trillion worth of treasuries to raise money for Congress. And here's why it is a disaster. The Federal Reserve isn't buying treasuries today. They are selling off their own stash, so that avenue is out. It'll be the public that needs to absorb all this excess supply. And the only way to get them to step up is to issue debt with even higher yields. If no one buys at 5%, you need to go to 5.5%. And if no one buys, you need to hit up to 6% or more until you sell them all. And this is going to push up borrowing costs across the board. Businesses can't get loans, mortgages will get more expensive, and consumers will get squeezed to the bone. So Janet Yellen is trapped. She knows the economy can't withstand higher bond yields. And here's how we know the Treasury is in real trouble. In a report by Bloomberg, the US Treasury slows their pace of issuing more long-term debt sales. Yellen has to borrow an additional $112 billion next week, but she's afraid of issuing more 10-year notes. She knows every single benchmark rate in the world is pegged to that. If the 10-year yield continues to fly up, this will push the economy closer and closer towards a collapse. Everything from mortgage rates to corporate loans to your credit card APRs will have to adjust up. This adds further pressure to consumers and companies, both of them. She will make the credit crunch even worse. Yellen is now pushing to sell more 3-year notes versus 10-year or 30-year bonds. 6 billion more of short-term bills will be issued this year versus last quarter. She is issuing more short-term bonds because the economy is on the verge of breaking down. This means that yields are going to stay high across the board. Whether it's the 1 to 3-year bonds or the 10-year, the Treasury has to sell all types of debt to raise the money. Everything is getting exposed today, guys. The financial markets are now screaming chaos because America is trying to fund battles by issuing endless amounts of debt. The battle for hegemony is starting to affect the real economy. So just imagine the amount of strain the bond market will have if Biden's war spending passes, because it will sure as hell won't stop at $100 billion. And here's how bad war spending can really get. Let's refer to Brown's University's updated report, and these figures will simply shock you. Over the past 21 years, the US has spent at least $8 trillion for their military adventures, mainly in the Middle East. A ton of money goes towards the Department of Defense and Pentagon, which then spends them on defense contractors. But take a look at the interest portion. The majority of the war spending has been funded by debt. This is US public debt where interest has to be paid. The interest paid has now reached $1 trillion in total, or almost $50 billion a year. If a regional war breaks out in the Middle East, war spending will erupt out of control. The interest on the national debt will balloon and yields will continue spiking to fund Israel. And I have further breaking news for you. The Federal Reserve has announced that they will keep rates steady. According to Powell, the better course of action for now, given the uncertainties, is to keep rates at 5.5%. They will not be hiking further because the economy is on the edge of a cliff. He knows that there's already enough upwards pressure on yields from government spending alone. He doesn't need to add fuel to the fire to tighten conditions. So here's the situation. Everything now depends on US deficit spending and the Middle East crisis. Government borrowing is already keeping yields high because of this tsunami of bonds. If Iran gets involved, if things get out of control, we could see war spending fly to the moon. But on the bright side, we might have another GDP print of 4.9% or higher, and that means the economy is doing well, right? But let me know what you think in the comments below. Will the Middle East continue to destabilize? And how much more money can the US government borrow and spend before the economy collapses? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.